In Greece proper, where the Chians, Rhodians, Coans, and also the Byzantians were continuing the social war against the Athenians, both sides were making great preparations, for they wished to decide the war by a naval battle. The Athenians had previously sent shores forth with 60 ships, but now, manning 60 more and placing as generals in command the most distinguished of their citizens, Iphicrates and Timotheus, they dispatched this expedition along with chairs to continue war upon their allies who had revolted. The Chians, Rhodians, and Byzantians, together with their allies, manned 100 ships and then sacked Imbros and Lemnos Athenian islands, and having descended on Samos with a large contingent, lay waste the countryside and besieged the city by land and by sea, and by ravaging many other islands that were subject to Athens, they collected money for the needs of the war. All the Athenian generals now met and planned at first to besiege the city of the Byzantians, and when later the Chians and their allies abandoned the siege of Samos and turned to assist the Byzantians, all the fleets became massed in the Hellespont. But just at the time when the naval battle was about to take place, a great wind fell upon them and thwarted their plans. When Chores, however, though the elements were against him, wished to fight, but Iphicrates and Timotheus opposed on account of the heavy sea, Chores, calling upon his soldiers to bear him witness, accused his colleagues of treason and wrote to the assembly about them, charging that they had purposely shirked the sea fight. And the Athenians were so incensed that they indicted Iphicrates and Timotheus, fined them many talents, and removed them from the generalship. Chores, now that he had succeeded to the command of the whole fleet and was eager to relieve the Athenians of its expense, undertook a hazardous operation. Now Artabazus had revolted from the Persian king, and with only a few soldiers, was on the point of joining combat with the satraps, who had more than 70,000. Chores, with all his forces, took part with Artabazus in a battle and defeated the king's army. And Artabazus, out of gratitude for his kindness, made him a present of a large sum of money, with which he was able to furnish his entire army with supply. The Athenians at first approved Chores' action, but later, when the king sent ambassadors and denounced Chores, they changed their minds. For word had been spread abroad that the king had promised Athens' enemies that he would join them in their war against the Athenians with 300 ships. The assembly, accordingly, taking a cautious attitude, decided to bring to a close the war against their revolted allies, and finding that they too desired peace, they easily came to terms with them. So the social war, as it was called, came to a close after lasting 4 years. In Macedon, 3 kings combined against Philip, the kings of the Thracians, Paeonians, and Illyrians. For these peoples, inasmuch as they bordered upon Macedonia, eyed with suspicion the aggrandizement of Philip. Singly, however, they were not capable of sustaining a combat, each having suffered defeat in the past, but they supposed that, if they should join their forces in a war, they would easily have the better of Philip. So it was that, while they were still gathering their armies, Philip appeared before their dispositions were made, struck terror into them, and compelled them to join forces with the Macedonians. When Callistratus was archon at Athens, the Romans elected as consuls Marcus Fabius and Gaius Plautius. During their term of office, the Sacred War, as it was called, began and lasted 9 years. For Philomulus the Phocian, a man of unusual audacity and lawlessness, seized the shrine in Delphi and kindled the sacred war for reasons somewhat as follows. When the Lacedaemonians had fought the Luctrian war with the Boeotians and been defeated, the Thebans brought a serious charge against the Lacedaemonians in the Amphictyonic Council because of their seizure of the Cadmea, and obtained a judgment against them for a large indemnity. And the Phocians, for having cultivated a large portion of the consecrated territory named Syrian, were arraigned in the council and were fined a large number of talents. When they did not discharge the assessments, the Hieronymones of the Amphictyons brought charges against the Phocians and demanded of the council that if the Phocians did not pay the money to the god, they should lay under a curse the land of those who were cheating the god. Likewise, they declared that the others against whom judgments had been passed should discharge their fines, the Lacedaemonians being in this category, and if they did not obey, they should incur the common hatred of the Greeks for their knavery. When the Greeks all ratified the decisions of the Amphictyons and the territory of the Phocians was about to be placed under the curse, Philomulus, who had the highest reputation among the Phocians, harangued his fellow countrymen, explaining that they were unable to pay the money on account of the magnitude of the fine, and that, to allow the territory to be cursed, was not only cowardly, but involved them in danger, since it was the destruction of the means by which they all lived. He endeavored also to prove that the judgments of the Amphictyons were unjust in the highest degree, since they had inflicted huge fines for the cultivation of what was a very small parcel of land. Accordingly, he advised them to treat the fines as null and void, and declared that the Phocians had strong grounds for their case against the Amphictyons, for in ancient times they had held control and guardianship of the oracle. As witness, he offered the most ancient and greatest of all poets, Homer, who said, "Now over Phocians Schadius ruled, and e'en Epistrophus. They dwelt in Cyparissus and in Pytho, land of rocks." On this account, he said they should enter a claim for the guardianship of the oracle on the ground that this belonged to the Phocians as an inheritance from their fathers. He promised that he would succeed with the enterprise if they would appoint him general with absolute power for the entire program and give him complete authority. When the Phocians, out of fear of the judgment, elected him general with absolute power, Philomelus set about energetically to fulfill his promise. First, he went to Sparta, where he conversed in private with Archidamus, king of the Lacedaemonians, representing that the king had an equal interest in the effort to render null and void the judgments of the Amphictyons, for there existed serious and unjust pronouncements of that council to the injury of the Lacedaemonians also. He accordingly disclosed to Archidamus that he had decided to seize Delphi, and that if he succeeded in obtaining the guardianship of the shrine, he would annul the decrees of the Amphictyon. Although Archidamus approved of the proposal, he said he would not for the present give assistance openly, but that he would cooperate secretly in every respect, providing both money and mercenary. Philomelus, having received from him 15 talents, and having added at least as much on his own account, hired foreign mercenaries and chose 1,000 of the Phocians, whom he called peltasts. Then, after he had gathered a multitude of soldiers and had seized the oracle, he slew the group of Delphians called Thracidae, who sought to oppose him and confiscated their possessions. But, observing that the others were terror-stricken, he exhorted them to be of good cheer, since no danger would befall them. When news of the seizure of the shrine was noised abroad, the Locrians, who lived nearby, straightway took the field against Philomelus. A battle took place near Delphi, and the Locrians, having been defeated with the loss of many of their men, fled to their own territory, and Philomelus, being elated by his victory, hacked from the slabs the pronouncements of the Amphictyons, deleted the letters recording their judgments, and personally caused the report to be circulated that he had resolved not to plunder the oracle, nor had he purposed to commit any other lawless deed, but that in support of the ancestral claim to the guardianship, and because of his desire to annul the unjust decrees of the Amphictyons of the Amphictyons, he was vindicating the ancestral laws of the Phocians. The Boeotians, coming together in an assembly, voted to rally to the support of the oracle and immediately dispatched troops. While these things were going on, Philomelus threw a wall about the shrine and began to assemble a large number of mercenaries by raising the pay to half as much again, and selecting the bravest of the Phocians he enrolled them, and quickly had a considerable army, for with no less than 5,000 troops he took up a position in defense of Delphi, already a formidable adversary for those who wished to make war upon him. Later on, having led an expedition into the territory of the Locrians and laid waste much of the enemy's land, he encamped near a river that flowed past a stronghold. Though he made assaults upon this, he was unable to take it and finally desisted from the siege, but joining battle with the Locrians he lost 20 of his men, and not being able to get possession of their bodies, he asked through a herald the privilege of taking them up. The Locrians, refusing to grant this, gave answer that amongst the Greeks it was the general law that Templar robbers should be cast forth without burial. Philomelus so resented this that he joined battle with the Locrians and, bending every effort, slew some of the enemy, and having got possession of their bodies, compelled the Locrians to make an exchange of the dead. As he was master of the open country, he sacked a large portion of Locris and returned to Delphi, having given his soldiers their fill of the spoils of war. After this, since he wished to consult the oracle for the war, he compelled the Pythian priestess to mount her tripod and deliver the oracle. Since I have mentioned the tripod, I think it not inopportune to recount the ancient story which has been handed down about it. It is said that in ancient times goats discovered the oracular shrine, on which account even to this day the Delphians use goats, preferably when they consult the oracle. They say that the manner of its discovery was the following. There is a chasm at this place, where now is situated what is known as the Forbidden Sanctuary, and as goats had been wont to feed about this because Delphi had not as yet been settled. Invariably, any goat that approached the chasm and peered into it would leap about in an extraordinary fashion and utter a sound quite different from what it was formerly wont to emit. The herdsman in charge of the goats marveled at the strange phenomenon, and having approached, had the same experience as the goats, for the goats began to act like beings possessed, and the goat herd began to foretell future events. After this, as the report was bruited among the people of the vicinity concerning the experience of those who approached the chasm, an increasing number of persons visited the place, and, as they all tested it because of its miraculous character, whosoever approached the spot became inspired. For these reasons, the oracle came to be regarded as a marvel and to be considered the prophecy-giving shrine of earth. For some time, all who wished to obtain a prophecy approached the chasm and made their prophetic replies to one another. But later, since many were leaping down into the chasm under the influence of their frenzy and all disappeared, it seemed best to the dwellers in that region, in order to eliminate the risk, to station one woman there as a single prophetess for all and to have the oracles told through her. And for her, a contrivance was devised which she could safely mount, then become inspired and give prophecies to those who so desired. And this contrivance has 3 supports, and hence was called a tripod, and, I dare say, all the bronze tripods which are constructed even to this day are made in imitation of this contrivance. In what manner, then, the oracle was discovered and for what reasons the tripod was devised, I think I have told at sufficient length. It is said that in ancient times virgins delivered the oracles because virgins have their natural innocence intact and are in the same case as Artemis, for indeed virgins were alleged to be well suited to guard the secrecy of disclosures made by oracles. In more recent times, however, people say that Echecrates the Thessalian, having arrived at the shrine and beheld the virgin who uttered the oracle, became enamored of her because of her beauty, carried her away with him, and violated her, and that the Delphians, because of this deplorable occurrence, passed a law that in future a virgin should no longer prophesy, but that an elderly woman of 50 should declare the oracles, and that she should be dressed in the costume of a virgin, as a sort of reminder of the prophetess of olden times. Such are the details of the legend regarding the discovery of the oracle, and now we shall turn to the activities of olden times. When Philomelus had control of the oracle, he directed the Pythia to make her prophecies from the tripod in the ancestral fashion. But when she replied that such was not the ancestral fashion, he threatened her harshly and compelled her to mount the tripod. Then, when she frankly declared, referring to the superior power of the man who was resorting to violence, "It is in your power to do as you please," he gladly accepted her utterance and declared that he had the oracle which suited him. He immediately had the oracle inscribed and set it up in full view, and made it clear to everyone that the god gave him the authority to do as he pleased. Having got together an assembly and disclosed the prophecy to the multitude, and urged them to be of good cheer, he turned to the business of the war. There came to him an omen as well in the temple of Apollo, namely an eagle which, after flying over the temple of the god and swooping down to earth, preyed upon the pigeons which were maintained in the temple precincts, some of which it snatched away from the very altars. Those versed in such matters declared that the omen indicated to Philomelus and the Phocians that they would control the affairs of Delphi. Elated accordingly by these events, he selected the best qualified of his friends for the embassies, and sent some to Athens, some to Lacedaemon, and some to Thebes. And he likewise sent envoys to the other most distinguished cities of the Greek world, explaining that he had seized Delphi, not with any designs upon its sacred properties, but to assert a claim to the guardianship of the sanctuary, for this guardianship had been ordained in early times as belonging to the Phocians. He said he would render due account of the property to all Greeks, and expressed himself as ready to report the weight and the number of the dedications to all who wished examination. But he requested that, if any through enmity or envy were to engage in war against the Phocians, these cities should preferably join forces with him, or, if not, at least maintain peaceful relations. When the envoys had accomplished their appointed mission, the Athenians, Lacedaemonians, and some others arranged an alliance with him and promised assistance. But the Boeotians, Locrians, Locrians, and some others passed decrees to the contrary intent and renewed the war in behalf of the god upon the Phocians. Such were the events of this year. When Diotimus was archon at Athens, the Romans elected as consuls Gaius, Marcius, and Gnaeus Manlius. During their term of office, Philomelus, foreseeing the magnitude of the war, began to gather a multitude of mercenaries and to select for active duty those of the Phocians who were fit. Although the war required additional funds, he kept his hands off the sacred dedications, but he did exact from the Delphians, who were exceptionally prosperous and wealthy, a sufficient sum of money to pay the mercenary. Having accordingly prepared a large army, he led it into the open country and was obviously holding himself ready to join issue with any who were hostile to the Phocian. And when the Locrians took the field against him, a battle was fought near the cliffs called Phaedriades, in which Philomelus won the victory, having slain many of the enemy and taken not a few alive, while some he forced to hurl themselves over the precipices. After this battle, the Phocians were elated by their successes, but the Locrians, being quite dejected, sent ambassadors to Thebes, asking the Boeotians to come to their support, and the gods. The Boeotians, because of their reverence for the gods, and because of the advantage they gained if the decisions of the Amphictyons were enforced, sent embassies to the Thessalians and the other Amphictyons, demanding that they make war in common against the Phocians. But when the Amphictyons voted the war against the Phocians, much confusion and disagreement reigned throughout the length and breadth of Greece. For some decided to stand by the god and punish the Phocians as Templar robbers, while others inclined toward giving the Phocians assistance. As tribes and cities were divided in their choice, the Boeotians, Locrians, Thessalians, and Parabians decided to aid the shrine, and in addition the Dorians and Dolopians, likewise the Atamanians, Achaeans of Phaeotis, and the Magnesians, also the Ionianians and some others, while the Athenians, Lacedaemonians, and some others of the Peloponnesians fought on the side of the Phocians. In the Luctrian War, the Thebans, after defeating the enemy, brought suit before the Amphictyons against the Spartans, the charge being that Phaebidas the Spartan had seized the Cadmea, and the Amphictyons assessed a fine of 500 talents for the offence. Then, when the Lacedaemonians had had judgment entered against them and failed to pay the fine during the period set by the laws, the Thebans again brought suit, this time for double damages. When the Amphictyons set the judgment at 1,000 talents, the Lacedaemonians, on account of the large amount of the fine, made declarations similar to those of the Phocians, saying that an unjust judgment had been rendered against them by the Amphictyons. Wherefore, though their interests were now common, the Lacedaemonians hesitated to begin war by themselves on account of the adverse judgment, but thought that it was more seemly to annul the judgments of the Amphictyons through the agency of the Phocians. For these particular reasons, they were very ready to fight on the side of the Phocians, and they cooperated in securing for them the guardianship of the sanctuary. When it was clear that the Boeotians would take the field with a large army against the Phocians, Philomelus decided to gather a great number of mercenaries. Since the war required ampler funds, he was compelled to lay his hands on the sacred dedications and to plunder the oracle. By setting the base pay for the mercenaries at half as much again as was usual, he quickly assembled a large number of mercenaries, since many answered the summons to the campaign on account of the size of the pay. Now, no men of honourable character enrolled for the campaign because of their reverence for the gods, but the worst knaves, and those who despised the gods because of their own greed, eagerly gathered about Philomelus, and quickly a strong army was formed out of those whose object it was to plunder the shrine. So Philomelus, because of the magnitude of his resources, soon had prepared a considerable army. He immediately advanced into the territory of the Locrians, with soldiers both foot and horse amounting to more than 10,000. When the Locrians marshalled their forces to meet him and the Boeotians came to the support of the Locrians, a cavalry battle ensued in which the Phocians had the superiority. After this, the Thessalians, together with the allies from neighbouring districts, having assembled to the number of 6,000, arrived in Locris and joining battle with the Phocians, met with a defeat by a hill called Argola. When the Boeotians put in an appearance with 13,000 men and the Achaeans from the Peloponnesus came to the support of the Phocians with 1,500, the armies encamped over against one another, both assembled in one place. After this, the Boeotians, who had taken captive on foraging parties a good many mercenaries, brought them out in front of the city, and made an announcement by heralds that the Amphictyons were punishing with death these men present who had enlisted with the Templar robbers, and immediately, making the deed follow the word, shot them all down. But the mercenaries serving with the Phocians were so enraged by this that they demanded of Philomulus that he mete out the like punishment to the enemy, and then, when, bending every effort, they had taken captive many men who were straggling up and down the countryside where the enemy were, they brought them back, and all these Philomulus shot. Through this punishment, they forced the opposite side to give up their overweening and cruel vengeance. After this, as the armies were invading another district and were making a march through heavily wooded rough regions, both vanguards suddenly became intermingled. An engagement took place, and then a sharp battle in which the Boeotians, who far outnumbered the Phocians, defeated them. As the flight took place through precipitous and almost impassable country, many of the Phocians and their mercenaries were cut down. Philomulus, after he had fought courageously and had suffered many wounds, was driven into a precipitous area and there hemmed in, and since there was no exit from it, and he feared the torture after capture, he hurled himself over the cliff, and having thus made atonement to the gods, ended his life. Onomachus, his colleague in the generalship, having succeeded to the command and retreated with such of his force as survived, collected any who returned from the flight. While these things were going on, Philip, king of the Macedonians, after taking Methone by storm and pillaging it, razed it to the ground, and having subdued Pagasae, forced it to submit. In the region of the Black Sea, Leucon, the king of the Bosporus, died after ruling 40 years, and Spartacus, his son, succeeding to the throne, reigned for 5 years. A war took place between the Romans and Faliscans, and nothing important or memorable was accomplished. Only raids and pillaging of the territory of the Faliscans went on. In Sicily, after Dion, the general had been slain by some mercenaries from Zacynthos Callippus, who had procured them for the assassination, succeeded him and ruled 13 months. When Theudemus was archon at Athens, the Romans elected as consuls Marcus Popilius and Marcus Fabius. During their term of office, now that the Boeotians had won a victory over the Phocians, and were of the opinion that the fate of Philomulus, who was chiefly responsible for the plundering of the temple and who had been punished by gods and men, would deter the rest from like villainy, they returned to their own country. But the Phocians, now freed from the war, for the present returned to Delphi, and there meeting with their allies in a common assembly, deliberated on the war. The moderate parties inclined toward the peace, but the irreligious, the hot-headed and avaricious were of the opposite opinion, and were looking around to find the proper spokesman to support their lawless aim. When Onomachus arose and delivered a carefully argued speech, urging them to adhere to their original purpose, he swung the sentiment of the gathering toward war, though he did so not so much with the intention of consulting the common welfare as with a view to his own interests, for he had been sentenced frequently and severely by the Amphictyons in the same manner as the rest, and had not discharged the fines. Accordingly, seeing that war was more desirable for himself than peace, he quite logically urged the Phocians and their allies to adhere to the project of Philomulus. Having been chosen general with supreme command, he began to collect a large number of mercenaries, and, filling the gaps in his ranks, caused by the casualties and having increased his army by the large number of foreigners enrolled, he set about making great preparations of allies and of everything else that is serviceable for war. He was greatly encouraged in this undertaking by a dream which gave intimation of great increase of power and glory. In his sleep, namely, it seemed that he was remodeling with his own hands the bronze statue which the Amphictyons had dedicated in the temple of Apollo, making it much taller and larger. He accordingly assumed that a sign was being given to him from the gods that there would be an increase of glory because of his services as general. But truth turned out to be otherwise. Rather, the contrary was indicated because of the fact that the Amphictyons had dedicated the statue out of the fines paid by the Phocians, who had acted lawlessly toward the shrine and had been fined for so doing. What was indicated was that the fine of the Phocians would take on an increase at the hands of Onomachus, and such turned out to be the case. Onomachus, when he had been chosen general in supreme command, prepared a great supply of weapons from the bronze and iron, and having struck coinage from the silver and gold, distributed it among the allied cities, and chiefly gave it as bribes to the leaders of those cities. Indeed, he succeeded in corrupting many of the enemy too, some of whom he persuaded to fight on his side, and others he required to maintain the peace. He easily accomplished everything because of man's greed. In fact, he persuaded even the Thessalians, who were held in highest esteem amongst the allies, by bribes to maintain the peace. In his dealings with the Phocians, he also arrested and executed those who opposed him and confiscated their property. After invading the territory of the enemy, he took Thronion by storm and reduced its inhabitants to slavery, and having intimidated the Amphictyons by threats, he forced them to submit. He sacked the cities of the Dorians and ravaged their territory. He invaded Boeotia, captured Orchomenus. Then, having attempted to reduce Chaeronea by siege and being defeated by the Thebans, he returned to his own territory. While these things were going on, Artabazus, who had revolted from the Persian king, continued the war against the satraps who had been dispatched by the king to take part in the war against him. At first, when Chors the Athenian general was fighting with him, Artabazus resisted the satraps courageously, but when Chors had gone and he was left alone, he induced the Thebans to send him an auxiliary force. Choosing Parmenes as general and giving him 5,000 soldiers, they dispatched him to Asia. Parmenes, by the support he gave to Artabazus and by defeating the satraps in 2 great battles, won great glory for himself and the Boeotians. Now it seemed an amazing thing that the Boeotians, after the Thessalians had left them in the lurch, and when the war with the Phocians was threatening them with serious dangers, should be sending armies across the sea into Asia and for the most part proving successful in the battles. While these things were going on, war broke out between the Argives and the Lacedaemonians, and in a battle that took place near the city of Orne, the Lacedaemonians won, and after they had taken Ornia by siege, returned to Sparta. Chors the Athenian general sailed to the Hellespont, captured Cestus, slew its adult inhabitants, and enslaved the rest. And when Cersobleptes, son of Cotys, because of his hostility to Philip and his alliance of friendship with the Athenians, had turned over to the Athenians the cities on the Chersonese except Cardia, the assembly sent out colonists to these cities. Philip, perceiving that the people of Methone were permitting their city to become a base of operations for his enemies, began a siege. And although for a time the people of Methone held out, later, being overpowered, they were compelled to hand the city over to the king on the terms that the citizens should leave Methone with a single garment each. Philip then razed the city and distributed its territory among the Macedonians. In this siege, it so happened that Philip was struck in the eye by an arrow and lost the sight of that eye. After this, Philip, in response to a summons from the Thessalians, entered Thessaly with his army and at first carried on a war against Lycophron, tyrant of Pherae, in support of the Thessalians. But later, when Lycophron summoned an auxiliary force from his allies, the Phocians, Phalus, the brother of Onomachus, was dispatched with 7,000 men. But Philip defeated the Phocians and drove them out of Thessaly. Then Onomachus came in haste with his entire military strength to the support of Lycophron, believing that he would dominate all Thessaly. When Philip in company with the Thessalians joined battle against the Phocians, Onomachus, with his superior numbers, defeated him in 2 battles and slew many of the Macedonians. As for Philip, he was reduced to the uttermost perils, and his soldiers were so despondent that they had deserted him. But by arousing the courage of the majority, he got them with great difficulty to obey his orders. Later, Philip withdrew to Macedonia, and Onomachus, marching into Boeotia, defeated the Boeotians in battle and took the city of Coronea. As for Thessaly, however, Philip had just at that time returned with his army from Macedonia and had taken the field against Lycophron, tyrant of Pherae. Lycophron, however, since he was no match for him in strength, summoned reinforcements from his allies the Phocians, promising jointly with them to organize the government of all the Thessaly. So when Onomachus in haste came to his support with 20,000 foot and 500 horse, Philip, having persuaded the Thessalians to prosecute the war in common, gathered them all together, numbering more than 20,000 foot and 3,000 horse. A severe battle took place, and since the Thessalian cavalry were superior in numbers and valor, Philip won. Because Onomachus had fled toward the sea, and Chors the Athenian was by chance sailing by with many triremes, a great slaughter of the Phocians took place, for the men in their effort to escape would strip off their armor and try to swim out to the triremes, and among them was Onomachus. Finally, more than 6,000 of the Phocians and mercenaries were slain, and among them the general himself, and no less than 3,000 were taken captive. Philip hanged Onomachus. The rest he threw into the sea as Templar robbers. After the death of Onomachus, his brother Phalus succeeded to the command of the Phocians. In an attempt to retrieve the disaster, he began to gather a multitude of mercenaries, offering double the customary pay, and summoned help from his allies. He got ready also a large supply of arms and coined gold and silver money. About the same time, Mausolus, the tyrant of Caria, died after ruling 24 years, and Artemisia, his sister and wife, succeeded to the throne and reigned for 2 years. Clearchus, the tyrant of Heraclea, was slain during the festival of Dionysus as he went to witness the spectacle after ruling 12 years, and his son Timotheus succeeded to the throne and ruled for 15 years. The Etruscans, continuing their war with the Romans, sacked much of the enemy territory, and after marauding as far as the Tiber returned to their own country. In Syracuse, civil strife having broken out between the friends of Dion and Callippus, Dion's friends were defeated, fled to Leontini, and, after a short time, when Hipparinus son of Dionysius had put ashore at Syracuse with troops, Callippus was defeated and driven from the city, and Hipparinus, having recovered his father's realm, ruled for 2 years. When Aristodemus was archon at Athens, the Romans elected as consuls Gaius Sulpicius and Marcus Valerius, and the 107th celebration of the Olympian Games was held, in which Mycrenes of Tarentum won the Stadian race. During their term of office, Phalus, the general of the Phocians after the death and defeat of his brother, effected another revival of the affairs of the Phocians, then at a low ebb on account of the defeat and slaughter of their soldiers. For since he had an inexhaustible supply of money, he gathered a large body of mercenaries and persuaded not a few allies to cooperate in renewing the war. In fact, by making lavish use of his abundance of money, he not only procured many individuals as enthusiastic helpers, but also lured the most renowned cities into joining his enterprise. The Lacedaemonians, for example, sent him 1,000 soldiers, the Achaeans 2,000, the Athenians 5,000 foot and 400 horse with Nausicaa as their general. The tyrants of Pherai, Lycophron, and Ptolemaeus, who were destitute of allies after the death of Onomachus, gave Pherai over to Philip, while they themselves, being protected by terms of truce, brought together their mercenaries to the number of 2,000, and, having fled with these to Phalus, joined the Phocians as allies. Not a few of the lesser cities as well actively supported the Phocians because of the abundance of money that had been distributed, for gold that incites man's covetousness compelled them to desert to the side which would enable them to profit from their gains. Phalus, accordingly with his army, carried the campaign into Boeotia, and, suffering defeat near the city of Orchomenus, lost a great number of men. Later, in another battle that took place by the Cephissus River, the Boeotians won again and slew over 500 of the enemy and took no fewer than 400 prisoners. A few days later, in a battle that took place near Coronea, the Boeotians were victorious and slew 50 of the Phocians and took 130 prisoners. Now that we have recounted the affairs of the Boeotians and Phocians, we shall return to Philip. Philip, after his defeat of Onomachus in a noteworthy battle, put an end to the tyranny in Pherai, and, after restoring its freedom to the city and settling all other matters in the Sicily, advanced to Thermopylae, intending to make war on the Phocians. But since the Athenians prevented him from penetrating the pass, he returned to Macedonia, having enlarged his kingdom not only by his achievement, but also by his reverence toward the god. Phalus, having made a campaign into the Locris known as Epicnemidian, succeeded in capturing all the cities but one named Nerix, which he had taken by treachery at night, but from which he was expelled again with the loss of 200 of his men. Later, as he was encamped near a place called Abai, the Boeotians attacked the Phocians at night and slew a great number of them. Then, elated by their success, they passed into Phocian territory and, by pillaging a great portion of it, gathered a quantity of booty. As they were on their way back and were assisting the city of the Nericeans, which was under siege, Phalus suddenly appeared, put the Boeotians to flight, and having taken the city by storm, plundered and razed it. But Phalus himself, falling sick of a wasting disease, after a long illness, suffering great pain as befitted his impious life, died, leaving Phalaicus, son of the Onomarchus, who had kindled the sacred war, as general of the Phocians, a stripling in years at whose side he had placed as guardian and supporting General Menesias, one of his own friends. After this, in a night attack upon the Phocians, the Boeotians slew their general Menesias and about 200 of his men. A short while later, in a cavalry battle which took place near Chaeronea, Phalaicus was defeated and lost a large number of his cavalry. While these things were going on, throughout the Peloponnese, also disturbances and disorders had occurred for the following reasons. The Lacedaemonians, being at variance with the Megalopolitans, overran their country with Archidamus in command, and the Megalopolitans, incensed over their actions but not strong enough to fight by themselves, summoned aid from their allies. Now the Argives, Sicyonians, and Messenians in full force and with all speed came to their assistance, and the Thebans dispatched 4,000 foot and 500 horse with sufficient placed in charge as general. The Megalopolitans accordingly, having taken the field with their allies, encamped near the headwaters of the Alpheus River, while the Lacedaemonians were reinforced by 3,000 foot soldiers from the Phocians and 150 cavalry from Lycophron and Paetoles, the exiled tyrants of Pherae, and, having mustered an army capable of doing battle, encamped by Mantinea. Then, having advanced to the Argive city of Ornae, they captured it before the arrival of the enemy, for it was an ally of the Megalopolitans. When the Argives took the field against them, they joined battle and defeated them and slew more than 200. Then the Thebans appeared, and since they were in number twice as many, though inferior in discipline, a stubborn battle was engaged, and as the victory hung in doubt, the Argives and their allies withdrew to their own cities, while the Lacedaemonians, after invading Arcadia and taking the city Helissus by storm and plundering it, returned to Sparta. Some time after this, the Thebans with their allies conquered the enemy near Telphusa, and after slaying many took captive Anaxander, who was in command, along with more than 60 others. A short time later, they had the advantage in 2 other battles and felled a considerable number of their opponents. Finally, when the Lacedaemonians proved victorious in an important battle, the armies on both sides withdrew to their own city. Then, when the Lacedaemonians made an armistice with the Megalopolitans, the Thebans went back to Boeotia. But Phalaicus, who was lingering in Boeotia, seized Chaeronea, and when the Thebans came to its rescue, was expelled from the city. Then the Boeotians, who now with a large army invaded Phocis, sacked the greater portion of it and plundered the farms throughout the countryside, and having taken also some of the small towns and gathered an abundance of booty, they returned to Boeotia. The Law Editor's Notes. 1 C. Chap. 7.34. 2 C. Nepos, Timotheus. 3. Menestheus, son of Iphicrates and son-in-law of Timotheus, was also associated with the command and later brought to trial. A battle was actually begun, the Battle of Embata, not in the Hellespont, but near Erythrae. C. Nepos, L.C., Hintsmail Regesta, cum pluribus amissis navibus, Polyaenus 3.929, Stephanus of Byzantium, S.V. Embatan. 3 C. Nepos, Timotheus 3.5, Iphicrates 3.3, Isocrates, Antidosis 129, Polyaenus 3.9, 29, 29, 29, Dionysius against Demosthenes 14, and Schaeffer, Demosthenes 12.175 Fet. For an interesting appraisal of these generals, see Chap. 85.7. Or see Chap. 34.1, Isocrates, Areopagiticus 8, 10, 81, Plutarch, Aratus 16, Papyrus Frag, in Festschrift für O, Hirschfeld 100, Skoll, Demosthenes 4.19, 5 C. Demosthenes 15.26, Isocrates, Peace 16 et Passim. Diodorus fails to state that Chios, Kos, and Rhodes were allowed to withdraw from the League and the independence of Byzantium was recognized. See Pickard Cambridge, Cambridge Ancient History 6.210-212. 6 see Justin 12.16.6. Plutarch, Alexander 3.5 and discussion in Belloc, Griechisch 3.1, 230, 1 and notes. 7 should probably read 10 years as in chap 59.1. See chap 14.3 and notes. For an account of the beginnings of the Sacred War, see Pickett Cambridge, Cambridge Ancient History, 6.213 f. 8. Originally the Council of the Amphictyonic League, an association which had the care of the temple and oracle of Delphi. Thebans and Thessalians, with the aid of small neighboring tribes, controlled the vote in the council. 9. The plain near Syra on the Corinthian Gulf, consecrated to Apollo of Delphi, and so not supposed to be cultivated. Key, Aeschines, against Ctesiphon, 112. Other causes for fining the Phocians are given in Pausanias, 10.2, 1, and Justin, 8.1, but this fine is mentioned in Pausanias, 10.15, 1. See chap 29.23. 10 recorders or officers in charge of sacred business at meetings of the Amphictyonic Council, 2 from each nation. 11. Town near Delphi. 12. Homeric name for Delphi. 13. Iliad, 2.517, 519. 14. C. Polyaenus, 5.45. 15. Unknown. Wesseling thinks they may be the foible Delphoi Therapes, noble attendants of the shrine, cp. Euripides, Ion, 94. 16. Near Amphissa. The account of the battle is repeated, chap 28.3. 17. See Plutarch, De Defectu Oraculorum, 42. Justin, 24.6. 18. School. On Aristophanes, Plutus, 9. 19. See chap 33.2. 20. A semicircular range of rocks on Mate, Parnassus, facing south, hence resplendent. Aesop is said to have been precipitated from the eastern rock Hyampeia, see Suidas, SUV, Isopos. 21. Chapters 27, 28 cover much the same ground as 23, 24. Diodorus, chaps. 23, 40 is the principal source for the Sacred War. Short sketches appear in Pausanias, 10.2, and in Justin, 8.12. 22. See Demosthenes, 19.61. 23. Book 15.53-56. 24. See Book 15.22. 25. For a contrary statement, see chap 56.5. 26. Unmentioned elsewhere. 27. The decisive battle was fought at Neon, see Pausanias, 10.24. A good description of the campaign is given by Belloc, Grecisch Geschichte 2, 3.1, 250, Note 1, and by Pickett Cambridge, Cambridge Ancient History, 6.215 5. 28. The last city on the coast of Philip's possessions, still belonging to Athens. Diodorus repeats the notice of its capture in chap 34.4 f. For the date, see Belloc, Op. Cit. 3.2, 269, and Pickett Cambridge, Cambridge Ancient History, 6.219. 29. The correct spelling is Spartocus, Spartokos, according to Latissue, and Ora sept. Ponti, Honti. Use. P. E. P. XVII. Diodorus is probably wrong as to the dates of these reigns. For a discussion, see Belloc, Op. Cit. 3.291 f. With whom Carey, Cambridge Ancient History, 6.71, disagrees. 30. C. Livy, 7.1626. 31. Callippus was a member of Plato's Academy. Keph, Athenaeus, 11.508. Diogenes Laertius, 3.46. 3.46. Suidas, only an Athenian in Plato, Ape, 7.333, quoted by Plutarch Dion, 54, who accompanied his friend Dion to Syracuse, claiming that Dion was substituting one tyranny for another, but actually wishing to get power himself. Callippus effected his assassination. See Belloc, Op. Cit. 3.1, 261 and note, and Hackforth, Cambridge Ancient History, 6.284 f. Parallel accounts are Plutarch, Dion, 54, 57, Nepos, Dion, 8, 10, Callicrates 6. 32. No mention of a colossus has been found. Pausanias, 10.15, 1. mentions a statue of Apollo dedicated by the Amphictyons from the fines levied upon the Phocian. 33. The Locrians. 34. In Epic Numidian Locris. Alphonsus, Thronion, and Nicaea were posts controlling the roads to Thermopylae held by Phocians, CP, Achaeas, on the embassy 132, Demosthenes 19.83. 35. In Ozolian Locris. Cup. Plutarch, Mulierum, Virtutes 249 EF. 36. C. Strabo 9.4. 11. 37. C. Chap 22.12. 38. For this campaign, see Belloc, Grecisch Geschichte 3.1 250-250-251. Pickard, Cambridge, Cambridge Ancient History 6.217-218. Glotz, Hist. Gru 3.268. 39. A city in Argolis. See Chap 39.4 for repetition of this event with greater detail of narrative. Seep, Belloc, Grecisch Geschichte 3.2 40 so spelled by Diodorus. Properly, Kersibleptes, Keep, Hoek, Hermes, 26.100, Note 3. King of Thrace, 360-341. 41 Clarux, or holders of allotments of land. See Ig, 2.795. 42. See Justin, 7.6, 1316. Demosthenes, 4.35. And Chap, 31.6. Also Ig, 22.1, 130. Or 43. See Chap, 14.1. Or 44. See Chap, 33.3. And Polyaenus, 4.2, 19. 45 at Hermium, Keep. Ephorus, Frere, 153, and Aristotle, Nicomachean Ethics, 3.89, 1116b. 46. On the chronology of these events, see Belloc, Griechische Geschichte 3.2 267, 270. 47. Belloc thinks it highly improbable that chairs happen to be sailing by in the Gulf of Pagasai, where this action is placed. He thinks that the Athenians sent chores to prevent Philip from taking Pagasai, but that chairs arrived too late. Belloc, Griechische Geschichte 3.1, 476, and Note 3. See Chap, 34.3. 48. Contrary to Chap, 61.2, and Pausanias, 10.25, who states that he was shot down or drowned, if we read Catapontiste, by his own men. If Onomarchus is the general referred to, as he seems to be, then Philip must have crucified his dead body. For still another account of Onomarchus's death, by drowning as he was being carried out to sea on a frightened horse. See Philo Judaeus in Eusebius Praeparatio Evangelica 8.1433. Or 49. See Chap, 7.3. 50c, Book 15.81, 5. On his death, see Justin, 16.5, 12 to end, and Memnon, FHG 3, 1.4. 51 Memnon, FHG 3, 2.1, and Justin, LC, say his brother Satyrus seized the power. See Belloc, Grecisch Geschichte 2, 3.294 f. 52 see Livy, 7.17, 6f. 53 see Chap, 31.7. Plutarch, Dion, 58.13. Polyaenus, 5.4. 54. This Hipparinus was son of the elder Dionysius and of Dion's sister Aristomache, hence half-brother of the younger Dionysius. 55 so Chap, 39.3, but Pythilaus in Plutarch, Pelopidas, 35.3. 56 see Chap, 35.46. 57 see Chap, 37.3. 58 see Justin, 8.2, 8.12, and Demosthenes, 19.84. 59 on the border of Phocis. Thayer's note. For fuller details, see the Encyclopaedia Britannica article RB. 60 see Pausanias, 10.26, and for an alternative story Philo Judaeus in Eusebius Praeparatio Evangelica 8.1433. 61, according to Pausanias, 10.27, Phalaicus, was the son of Phalus. 62 said of Philomulus chap. 23.1. 63, they even sent ambassadors to Athens begging help. It was on this occasion that Demosthenes delivered his speech on the Megalopolitans XVIII. See also Pausanias 8.27, 9, 10. 64 CP. Chap. 34.3. 65 or 65b for these Arcadian cities, see Pausanias 8.3, 3, Ellison, and 8.25, 1-3, Felpausa. The previous next to images with borders lead to more information. The thicker the border, the more information. Details here, up to Diodorus classical texts, Lacus Curtius home. A page or image on this site is in the public domain only if its URL has a total of 1 asterisk. If the URL has 2 asterisks, the item is copyright someone else and used by permission or fair use. If the URL has none, the item is C. Bill Thayer. See my copyright page for details and contact information. Page updated, 28 Feb 18.